We invite you to the Eschatology of the Prophets 2026 Gateway to Fulfillment Conference, featuring Don K. Preston, William Bell Jr., Jack Scott, Tim Martin, Michael Miano, Zach Davis, and Steve Magua. Join us July 8th through 11th, 2026 at the beautiful Todd Hall Retreat Center near St. Louis, Missouri, for 4 days of powerful biblical teaching, fellowship, worship, and prophetic insight. Seats are limited. Register today at www.thewellchurchstl.com/events.
Well, very good afternoon to you. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Welcome to a session of Ask the Pastor Bible Study Live. My name is Steve Magua, and I'm delighted to join with you on today to do a watch party. We are going to be doing a watch party on this broadcast. And that means that we are actually going to be reviewing some of the presentations. Actually, we are going to review all of the presentations, just not all in one sitting. For instance, today we are only going to be reviewing Tim's presentation, the very first one that he made on Wednesday, July the 8th. That's what we're going to be doing on this afternoon. There were 6 speakers that eventually were able to make it to the conference. Zach Davis did not make it to the conference as we had intended, but we are hoping that we will have him next year and, of course, in future editions. So we had Tim Martin, we had Don Preston, we had William Bell, we had Michael Miano, we had Jack Scott and myself as the speakers. And of course, we had our praise and worship team, which did an excellent job. We had a media team that had a wonderful outing. And we also had the Todd Hall Retreat staff that really fed us well and lodged us very well. And of course, some of you that I can already see online were part of the conference. Let me just make sure that my audio. All right. I'm hoping that my audio is coming out pretty clearly. Sounds pretty low to me when I just checked it. So let me just increase it just in case. All right. Now, can you guys tell me if that is a wonderful outing? And sounds good. Sounds good. All right. So Helen White, greetings to you. Hopefully you are doing very well. So today we are going to watch together Tim Martin's presentation. I doubt that we are going to be able to watch the whole thing. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing 10 minutes at a time because his whole presentation is about 55 minutes. So I'm going to do 10 minutes at a time. I'm going to give some comments. I'm also going to give you guys an opportunity to make your own comments. I am going to display all comments, good, bad, ugly. I hope that we can be Christian brothers and sisters. We don't need to be ugly with each other. But nevertheless, if you have questions, if you have objections, express them, because I am going to note some of your comments, and I'm going to make sure that when we do have a live Q&A with Tim Martin about his presentations, that I can present some of the things that you guys may ask for me to clarify. Excuse me just 1 second. Can you turn on the AC? It's very hot in here. Put it at 74. So yeah, we are going to be taking 10 minutes at a time, and then we see what we may learn together. So without much further ado, let me go ahead and bring on Tim Martin. When it's playing, I am actually going to have him full screen, and then of course I'm going to come back in 10 minutes to have to hear what you guys are saying. Welcome.
Always first, I guess. He did this to me last year too in Montana. I was the lead-off speaker. So I guess here we go. My presentation today is titled The Faith at the Field of Anathoth, from Jeremiah chapter 32, which is Jeremiah's story of a very special time and something that he did as a testimony. Jeremiah's story captured my attention by reading Eugene Peterson, pastoral books. Has anybody read Eugene Peterson's material? Raise your hand if you're familiar with Eugene Peterson. Okay, so he is the one who did the modern paraphrase Bible called The Message in 2002. I think he finished out the Old Testament as well. And I don't really use The Message. I'm not a big fan. A very big reason is because Peterson was an idealist in his eschatology, and he neutralized virtually every time text in the New Testament as a result. For example, The Message renders Matthew 24:34 like this. He says, "Don't take this lightly. I'm not just saying this for some future generation, but for all of you. This age continues until all these things take place." I think the term that comes to my mind is creatively ambiguous, right? That empties the time statement of meaning because it's generically for all of you, including future generations, as is typical in idealism. And Peterson garbled 100 plus time texts in the New Testament in The Message, which is unfortunate. And that's the way Bible translation goes. Bible translation is always, 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 always an aspect of biblical interpretation. But I consider Eugene Peterson to be hands down the greatest modern practical theological writer of our time. So don't judge Eugene Peterson, the pastoral theologian, by the Message paraphrase translation that made him famous. If you want to dive deeper into the backstory of my talk today and my thoughts, let me recommend his book on the life of Jeremiah the prophet, titled Run with the Horses, The Quest for Life at Its Best. One of the last chapters in that book is titled, I Bought the Field at Anathoth, where he lays out the application of the faith that Jeremiah modeled at Anathoth. And he did imply covenant context to the story in his book. Now, maybe I'm biased. Peterson was born and raised in Montana. He was the offspring of Norwegian immigrants who settled there more than a century ago. Montana comes through loud and clear in his books. If you ever read Eugene Peterson, you're going to hear his stories about Montana. So specifically, I would recommend Reverse Thunder, which is his reflections on the book of Revelation from an idealist perspective. He also has a book called Leap Over a Wall, which is based on the life of David. The contemplative pastor is focused on congregational ministry, and he has a book on the Psalms called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And that's a very interesting title because he stole that phrase, a long obedience in the same direction, from Nietzsche and put it to use for a godly purpose in that book. Peterson retired to Northwest Montana by Lakeside a couple of decades ago. It's actually up by Jack Scott's area. Before he died at 85 in the year 2018. It was probably 2010 to 2012. He was probably close to 80 years old at the time, but he got invited to be the keynote speaker at the annual Montana Governor's Prayer Breakfast at the Capitol in Helena. And that's where I got to meet him in person. And at the conclusion, someone mentioned that he would be available for small group discussion at a local church after the event if anybody wanted to join him for open discussion. And I will never forget the next couple of hours of interaction, questions and answers, and dialogue that took place with about 12 of us sitting at his feet. It was profound. So I want to dedicate this presentation to the memory of Eugene H. Peterson and his pastoral work, because his books have had a monumental impact on my life. So I recommend getting his books, read them. You won't regret it. You don't even have to touch the message if you prefer not to. The story of the field of Anathoth immediately follows the famous promise of the new covenant in Jeremiah 31, and that is no coincidence. This image was produced by Philip Kaiser, and it shows how Jeremiah comes to us in a massive chiastic structure. Chiasm is a literary device designed to rhyme ideas or subjects and highlight something important. And that important thing is at the middle or center of chiasm. That's where it all leads up to. That's the hinge. And that's where it all turns and works its way back. If you notice, these ideas rhyme. So the center is the exclamation point. Thus, the New Covenant prophecy of Jeremiah 31 is the center and pivot point for the whole book of Jeremiah. That highlights the centrality and the significance of Jeremiah's eschatology. It is the eschatology of the New Covenant creation. And structure confirms theology and highlights meaning because literary structure is meaning. So think about the profound significance. The entire book of Jeremiah is carefully ordered to reveal Jeremiah's eschatology. Chi in Greek is similar to our X, and X marks the spot. Right in the center, there it is. The eschatology of Jeremiah is the New Covenant creation. Futurism will reject the obvious implication, but Jeremiah declares the prophetic witness for the contemplative reader. Jeremiah proclaims covenant eschatology. Been there all along, but God's people are just now beginning to wake up to preterism, and I'm convinced that we're sitting at the very dawn of a new era of profound theological revolution. So we need to stop and ponder what fulfillment highlights. The New Covenant is the eschatology, not just of Jeremiah, but all of the prophets that we study. The center point is very important. We'll come back to this later as far as the tight-knit unit. And my presentation today is really part one of a three-part series where I'm going to basically show how Jeremiah 31, which is about the Lord giving a sun for light by day and ordinances of the moon and stars for a light by night, is connected to the ordinances of the nation of Israel. So I'm going to argue that Jeremiah 31 is parallel to Psalm 102:18, which was about a people yet to be created, which is parallel to Revelation 21:1. So we're going to take a closer look at that as we go. But I should add here that I believe Jeremiah 31 is referenced at the chiastic center of the book of Hebrews for exactly the same reason. It's the center point and pivot for the book of Hebrews. And this is my rudimentary chiasm. It's not complete. May change some things later, but it works for what I'm trying to present here. I've seen some variations of chiasms in the book of Hebrews, and every example that I've seen puts the New Covenant prophecy of Hebrews chapter 8 at the center, no matter how they break out chiasm or the details that they actually can put in. But Hebrews opens with the creation of the ages, plural, referencing Genesis creation, declaring the in the beginning, Genesis 1:1, earth and heavens to be growing old like a garment about to be changed. That's not a controversial position. Every commentary that I have ever examined will note the obvious connection and allusion to Genesis creation. And I'll add more reasons for why that's the case this week. But every commentary that I've seen makes the obvious link to Genesis 1. And the matching chiastic structure takes us to Hebrews 12:26 at the end, which is the shaking and removal of what has been made, not just of the earth, but also heaven. So what was coming to an end was greater than merely Sinai. The book of Hebrews is not Israel only. And I want to just lay that out from the beginning here. This isn't Israel only, but the whole Old Covenant creation. Hebrews 2 speaks about the bringing of many sons to glory, and that matches Hebrews 11. And the ages, plural, formed with the hall of faith from Abel forward. So that rhymes that idea. Hebrews 4 declares rest, referencing both the promised land and the seventh day of creation. It matches Hebrews 10 in the purification and remission of sins through Christ, access through the veil firmament, which is his body. And then we have a rhyming idea between Melchizedekian greater priesthood, that's Genesis again, which is discussed in Hebrews 7, matching the high priesthood discussion of Hebrews 9. And the center pivot of Hebrews 8 announces the fulfillment of Jeremiah's new covenant prophecy, in that he says in new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. Now, what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. So how does that chiasm work? That center point, Hebrews 8:13, matches the growing old and removal language of both back at the beginning of Hebrews 1 and Hebrews 12. The center links to both ends. That symmetry is key to biblical chiastic structure and unites the eschatology of the prophets with Jesus and the apostles' own prophetic teaching. Hebrews consistently goes back to Genesis and includes Moses in the unfolding covenant unity. See Hebrews 11, right? The Hall of Faith goes from Abel all the way through the Old Covenant history. Now,
All right. Let me mute that first of all. So that is a fast, almost 11 minutes actually. I let it run for 11 minutes of Tim's presentation, Faith at the Field of Anathoth. And I want to welcome your questions or your comments. Whatever questions I will not be able to answer, I will actually record so that when we are in a live session with Tim Martin, I will ask him to answer the questions that you may actually have pertaining to his presentation. So I just want to summarize, because we are doing a watch party, so I'm not going to try and explain too much of what he's saying. But he begins by recommending the works of Eugene Peterson. And I didn't know until this conference that Eugene Peterson is the same guy who wrote the Message Bible. I'm very familiar with the Message Bible. Some of you are very familiar with the Message Bible. I was not familiar with him as being a theologian, and I was quite surprised to learn that Eugene Peterson is quite an astute theologian, according to Tim. I have not read any of Eugene Peterson's books, but I was very, very fortunate that one of the books that Tim Martin had from Eugene Peterson, my wife asked him for it and he gave it to her. So I will be reading Eugene Peterson's book here very shortly. Now, Tim highlights a very, very important point here. First of all, let me just state that he says that he will develop his idea about an eschatology of the prophets that shows that the eschatology at the end of the ages was established at the very beginning of the ages in Genesis, and of course, as Preterism believes, was consummated at the time of the second coming in AD 70, the passing away of the heavens and so on and so forth. But he says he's going to use Jeremiah as his basis for explaining this, and he says that Jeremiah 31 is the center of the whole of Jeremiah's eschatology. And Jeremiah 31 has been very important to me because I remember being in high school and my Christian religious education teacher, we took religious education as an academic subject in high school because Kenya is a very Christian or religious country, let me say. And so I remember as we were going through the prophets, my Christian religious education teacher, who also happened to be the vice principal of our school, said that the most important passage in the whole Bible, at least the Old Testament Bible, is Jeremiah 31, from verse 31 up to verse 34. And so that stuck in my mind. So when Tim presented this as being the center of his lessons, I was pretty excited as to what I was going to learn. Now, the other thing that he highlights there, and I'll just mention it, and of course, I welcome your comments and your questions, is the device of literature that is found in the Bible that is called chiasms. I don't know how many of you are familiar with chiasms. Chiasms are literally devices that biblical writers and other writers seem to use, in which they want to highlight a very, very important idea. And so they arrange their writing very, very carefully so that the central idea is at the very center of their writing, And on either side of their writings, they actually have matching mirror ideas, so that you begin at one point. In fact, let me go ahead and display what he showed without necessarily having to go back to his presentation, because I just want to show this, because I think some people saw that. I don't know how many people got it. So this is what Tim displayed at the conference, and let me make sure that I put it up there. There we go. Yeah. So this is what our team displayed as the chiasm that was designed here by Philip Kaiser. And you can see that the center of Jeremiah is chapter 31, which of course talks about the new covenant. And you can see that you have the letters here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. H is the new covenant. If you go at the very bottom, from the end of Jeremiah, you go backwards, you will come back to Jeremiah 31, and you have this matching. So if you look at the A at the very top, Jeremiah's call to destroy and to plant matches Jeremiah 52, epilogue, Jeremiah's call to destroy, to plant, fulfilled. You have B, oracles against Judah, invasion and disaster from the north, matches, and that is from chapter 2 to chapter 12. It matches what we see in chapter 46 to 51, where oracles against nations, invasion and disaster from the north are actually declared. You have C being Judah's exile and suffering predicted, Judah's suffering and exile accomplished in C. So you have this structure in which Jeremiah purposely arranges his book such that the people then would immediately understand what his main point is. So in other words, they already knew, the ancient people understood that Jeremiah was doing this. So it's like writing a poem or writing lyrics to a song. You see lyrics to a song and you can already tell where the main verses are, you can tell where the chorus is, and so on and so forth. So you are able to go back and forth from the main verses and the next batch of verses to back to the chorus, and so on and so forth. Its structure, it is designed for many reasons. First of all, just to communicate a main idea, for symbolism, for memorization. And so Tim presented this. Now, not only did he show us this one, he said that there is a similar chiastic structure when you go over to Hebrews. When you go over to Hebrews, and he suggested that there is a chiasm there is a structure there. It means that the writer of Hebrews also sits down and designs Hebrews in the same way. So we have A being the creation of the ages at the beginning, which of course goes all the way back to Genesis. Then it is matched at the end by the removal of things made. That is the removal of the universe that is made at Genesis 1. At B, you have many sons brought to glory. You have the hall of faith matching it in the opposite direction. And at the very center of this, just like in Jeremiah, you have the new covenant. So hopefully you guys are able to kind of grasp what he's talking about there in terms of the chiasms, the structure that is used. But he is going to use this in the next three presentations to bring a cohesive understanding of what the eschatology of the prophets really meant, and how there is a consistency from Moses the prophet to the prophets who are advancing the covenant lawsuit according to Moses' law, and how this is fulfilled in Christ as covenant eschatology believes in 70 AD, and so on and so forth. So that's the introduction. Now, are there any questions? Is there anybody that first part, you didn't get it, you'd like for me to go over it? I can definitely go over it. You will notice that Tim Martin says that Jeremiah 31, Psalm 102, and Hebrews all point to Genesis creation. Now, since the end of the conference, and especially the last 2 days, there's been a big uproar in the preterist community because some people are saying that no, the heavens and the earth that pass away in Revelation chapter 20 actually start in Mount Sinai. And of course, covenant creationists like Tim and myself and Jeff Vaughn and others say, no, there is a consistency in the Bible. What begins in Genesis ends in Revelation. Now, what are your thoughts? That debate is still going on. It will go on for a while. So we are not going to try and resolve it today, but I would like to know your thoughts. Do you believe that when John in Revelation 21 says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away and there was no more sea. What heaven and earth is that passes away? What sea is that is no more? Is it Old Covenant Israel as it was being inaugurated as God's covenant people at Mount Sinai in Exodus? Or is it Genesis 1:1? What is the first heaven and the first earth? Now, you don't have to answer today, and we don't have to come to a resolution today, because Tim Martin does start off by saying, I am going to present 3 presentations that will build upon each other. Therefore, I want to encourage everyone, even those who totally oppose covenant creation, don't just watch the first one and make your decisions and jump to conclusions. Watch all 3 presentations by Tim Martin to see what he develops. So we're going to continue, because in the next part, Tim Martin is going to now challenge one of our brothers within the preterist community, Mike Sullivan. He's going to use Mike Sullivan's work to show that Old Covenant Israel began and was inaugurated long before Mount Sinai. Well, let's pick it up with Tim Martin again. Let me bring this up again, and here we go. So I'm going to rewind just a little bit, then start off where he stopped, and then we can go from there.
And unites the eschatology of the prophets with Jesus and the apostles' own prophetic teaching. Hebrews consistently goes back to Genesis and includes Moses in the unfolding covenant unity. See Hebrews 11, right? The Hall of Faith goes from Abel all the way through the Old Covenant history. Now, I like how Mike Sullivan put it in his book, Moses the Messiah, when he says this in the opening sentence of chapter 1. He says, when most Christians think of Moses as being a prophet, they recall how God worked through him to perform great miracles, such as inflicting plagues upon Egypt and parting the Red Sea. However, they tend not to view him as a prophet in the sense of Isaiah, Daniel, Malachi, or Zechariah, predicting and establishing the foundational pillars of eschatology, doctrine of last days. These pillars concern the last days, the appointed time of the end, and there's a Greek word for that, kairos. Where's the first use of the word kairos? In the Septuagint. I'll come back to that. But the day of the Lord, the decreation and new creation, the avenging of the martyrs. Who's the first Old Covenant martyr? Abel, right? And judgment and resurrection of the dead. We're talking about the resurrection from the death of Adam. That's a crucial point to grasp, and I think of Moses as a prophet like all the other prophets, because there is deep, deep unity between the eschatology of Moses and the eschatology of the prophets, because Moses is one of them, right? So can we all agree on that? And Mike does a fantastic job of presenting that link and the link between Moses and the eschatology of the rest of the Bible in his book. Now, let me stretch the implication consistently the other way. Does Moses' protology, that is the doctrine of first things, match the later prophets' protology in the same way that we already understand about eschatology? In other words, does Moses have the same view of Genesis creation as the later prophets? You know, Jeremiah cites Genesis chapter 1 directly and alludes to Genesis 1 numerous times in his prophecy, including Jeremiah 31. So what do we do with that? How does Jeremiah and the prophets understand Genesis creation? does Jeremiah the prophet understand Genesis 1 the same way that Moses the prophet understood Genesis 1 before him? I believe the answer to that is yes. And think about it for a second. Would it be at all consistent to say that Moses and the prophets are all united in their eschatology, but have a completely different understanding of Genesis chapter 1? Does that make sense to you? That does not make sense to me. And I would argue it would be an arbitrary and inconsistent hermeneutic if the later prophets have a different view of Genesis 1 than Moses. So the question then becomes, if we're talking about two different meanings of Genesis chapter 1, the way the prophets use Genesis chapter 1 and the way Moses lays out Genesis 1 as it has come to us, is where does the meaning of Genesis 1 change in the biblical text between Moses and the later prophets? Can this change in meaning of Genesis 1 be demonstrated exegetically? And this issue relates to eschatology as well, because partial preterists accept fulfillment of the last days and fulfillment of all of the discourse in AD 70, but what do? They claim there remains a material universe eschatology to come at the end of the world. And we full preterists ask them, where does the meaning of heaven and earth change to that material creation definition? Show it in the text. Don't just assume it. And if that change from covenant to material universe in eschatology can't just be assumed for the sake of tradition, then I would argue that a change in the meaning of Genesis 1 between Moses and the later prophets can't just be assumed for the sake of tradition. Exegesis of the text must always drive conclusions. Furthermore, if a later prophet under inspiration changes the meaning of the early prophet's definition of Genesis 1, do you see the Pandora's box we just opened? Then why couldn't the later apostles under inspiration change the meaning of the prophet's eschatology later? That's what some futurists claim. They say, well, the apostles came, and we know that the way that's Isaiah 65 is talking about national restoration, national context, but the apostles changed that to the physical world. So we've got a little bit of an issue. I would argue it's incoherent for a full preterist to insist that Moses, prophet, meant something different in Genesis 1 than the other prophets who apply Genesis 1 in their prophecies. And I would argue the entire full preterist theological paradigm assumes this consistency.
Sorry, I wanna pause there, because I think that what Tim Martin says there is so important, and I want to pause here and have this discussion with you. I don't know how many of you are actually able to answer back. I don't know how many of you are able to respond. And the first thing is that what Tim does is that he quotes Mike Sullivan in a very, very, very positive light. That first quote of Mike Sullivan is a commendation for Mike Sullivan. He does say that Mike Sullivan does an excellent job, and I agree with him. I own the book, or I used to own the book, Moses to Messiah by Mike Sullivan. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had a friend who was going back to Africa a year ago, and I took most of my preterist books and I sent them to Africa for the people there, because they don't have access to them as much. And I'm hoping that when I go to Arkansas later on next month, I'll be able to acquire another one from Mike, including the new book that he will be putting out there. So he begins by highlighting something that Mike Sullivan says. And what Mike Sullivan says is that Moses should not be viewed only as a prophet. Moses should be viewed as, let me put this slide up actually. Moses should be viewed not just as a lawgiver, but as a prophet. So this is what Mike Sullivan says actually. When most Christians think of Moses as being a prophet, they recall how God worked through him to perform great miracles, such as inflicting plagues upon Egypt and parting the Red Sea. However, they tend not to view him as a prophet in the sense of Isaiah, Daniel, Malachi, or Zechariah. That is, predicting and establishing the foundational pillars of eschatology, the doctrine of last things. He continues to say, these pillars concern the last days, the appointed time of the end, the day of the Lord, decreation and new creation, the avenging of the martyrs, and judgment and the resurrection of the dead. So what Tim points out here is that Mike points out something that is really key, that is very, very important to understand, that Moses is actually the first prophet, if you will. And indeed, in my presentation, which I presented, I think it was on Thursday night, the day after Tim presented this, I did show and I did point out that Moses is a prophet. And in Deuteronomy 32, which Mike Sullivan actually does a very good job with, together with Zach Davis and Rick Welch and Don Preston, they usually meet together and they are doing this discussion, and they show that Moses was prophesying about future things. So now the question that comes up is this. If what the other prophets, and this is Tim's point, and I think it's just such an excellent point, if the later prophets, they take Moses's prophecies about the end of times, the last days, and they don't change the meaning of what Moses knows. So as full preterists, we believe that the eschatology of Moses is the eschatology of the prophets. And that the eschatology of Moses, which is the eschatology of the prophets, is also the eschatology of Jesus and the apostles. That's why we, full preterists, say that all things were fulfilled, not just in the first coming of Christ, but in the second coming of Christ in 70 AD. Right? So Moses is a prophet, and the things that he prophesies about the end of Old Covenant Israel were fulfilled. First of all, were reiterated by the other prophets, and then by Jesus and the apostles, and were fulfilled within the time frame that Moses and the prophets and Jesus set up, which is in the first century. So there is a consistency of how the eschatology of Moses is read by the prophets, by Jesus, and by the apostles. So what Tim asks is this: is there a consistency in how Moses understands protology? That's the beginning. With how Jeremiah understands it, with how Isaiah understands it, with how Joel understands it, with how Jesus, and is there a different story when you come to protology? In other words, does Moses speak of one type of protology while the apostles take Moses' writings and redefine them to mean something else? To mean something else? This is what Tim is asking. Is Moses talking about a material creation in Genesis, whereas all of the prophets seem to take the language of Moses in Genesis and use it for covenantal purposes? How come the prophets are consistent? They agree with Moses pound for pound, one to one, when it comes to eschatology, but they seem to depart from Moses when it comes to protology? Is that consistent? Is that even fair? Is that even true? And of course, Tim Martin says that is not true. What the prophets say about Genesis is based on what Moses means about Genesis. Just in the same way, what the prophets say about eschatology based on Moses remains unchanged. They don't change. You don't say what Moses is saying is not exactly what Jeremiah is saying. They're saying the same thing in eschatology. Therefore, they're saying the same thing when it comes to protology also, right? So he asks a very, very critical question. A very critical question. I'm going to put it up here because I think it's important that we look at it. Does Moses have the same view of Genesis creation as the later prophets? In other words, the way I would actually reframe this, the way I had it, the way I hear it even now, do the later prophets have the same view of Genesis as Moses? Or do they differ? How does Jeremiah and the prophets understand Genesis creation? By the way, let me recognize here that our first comment, 40 minutes and our first comment, that's because I'm an ant. I'm still introducing myself, Jack. Jack Scott, all the way from Montana, watching, or rather listening. He's not watching because he's driving. He's listening to this broadcast while he is driving home. And of course, he took the very quick and safe moment to mention that he's on his way home from work. So I want to encourage all of you to comment these questions that Tim Martin is asking. What are the answers? Do the prophets have a different view of Genesis than Moses? Is Moses speaking about the creation of atoms and the creation of galaxies and the creation of material things, whereas none of the prophets seem to have that idea? Doesn't that sound strange to you? That the prophets would not have an inkling that Moses is speaking about atoms, and they apply the creation language to covenant? What is Tim talking about? Because I may not be able to go much further than here where we are today at the 15-minute mark, 16-minute mark, because we are doing a watch party. We want to really understand what Tim is saying. We want to see if there's a consistency. So consider this. Let me do this. I'm gonna bring Tim out here, and I'm gonna open up my Bible, okay? And I'm gonna put it on the screen. So Genesis 1, verse number 2. So we know verse number 1. In the beginning, God created bara, the heavens and the earth. Right? The earth was without form and void. Tohu wa bohu. And darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Right? Now, I want you to focus just on this part that I just highlighted. The earth was without form and void. So, what does that mean? What is that referring to? So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. So, what does it mean that the earth was without form and void? Is it talking, was there a chaotic situation? Is this an uncreated planet that does not have structure? Well, if you are reading Genesis as a science book and from a fundamentalist position, that's what you gotta believe. If you're saying this is how the world was began, and some people put a gap between verse 1 and verse 2, they say God created the heavens and the earth, they were perfect, and then millions or billions of years passed and something happened. There was a war in the heavens, some people say. So they insert Revelation 12 right there. But is that what happened? Were there millions or billions of years between verse 1 and verse 2? Well, look at how the prophet Jeremiah, I'm going to open up just on a parallel screen, Jeremiah chapter 4. So this is what Tim probably would not have had time in the presentations to go into this. But look at what Jeremiah does. Now, Jeremiah chapter 4, just so you get a context, is Jeremiah's prophecy about the judgment that was about to fall upon the nation of Judah in 586, 587 BC. Okay. If you return, he begins, Israel, declares the Lord, you should return to me. If you remove your detestable things from my presence and do not waver, and if you swear, as the Lord lives in truth, in justice, in righteousness, then nations shall bless themselves in him shall they glory. For thus says the Lord to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground. So he's speaking to the men of Judah, for thus says the Lord to the men of Judah and Jerusalem. So notice Jeremiah is prophesying about what is happening in Jerusalem. Declare in Judah, he says in verse 5, proclaim in Jerusalem and say, blow the trumpet through the land, cry aloud, say, assemble, let us go into the fortified city, raise up a standard to our Zion, flee for safety. Why? Stay not. In other words, don't stay in Judah. Don't stay in Jerusalem, God's city. Why should we flee from God's city? For I bring disaster from the north. So the disaster that is coming upon Judah is coming from the Lord's hand. He is bringing great destruction upon the land. A lion has gone up from his thicket. It's Babylon. A destroyer of nations has set out. He has gone out from his place to make your land a waste. Your cities will be a ruin without inhabitant. Watch that. Look at that. Your land will be a waste. Your cities will be in ruins without inhabitant. What does Genesis say? The earth was without form and void, without inhabitant. Waste. Jeremiah 4. That's what your land will be like. Because of this, put on sackcloth, lament, and wail, for the fierce anger of the Lord has not turned back from us. In that day declares the Lord, courage shall fail both king and officials. The priest shall be appalled, the prophet shall be astounded. Then I said, Lord God, surely you have utterly deceived these people in Jerusalem, saying it shall be well with you. So, because previously in other prophets, God had said it shall be well with you. But now he's saying something totally different. Now, I want to skip over to verse 23. Because Jeremiah, I've already showed you the context, is prophesying about what is about to happen to Judah because of the Babylonian invasion. Verse number 23. What does Jeremiah say? I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking. All the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and behold, there was no man. But I want you to focus on verse 23. Jeremiah says, I looked on the land. The word is Eretz, the land of Israel. And behold, it was without form and void. So Jeremiah prophesies that he sees something about to happen to Judah. Judah is about to become formless and void. Now Jeremiah quotes Genesis verbatim. Verbatim. So in other words, whatever Genesis is saying is exactly what Jeremiah sees concerning Judah. Whatever Jeremiah sees concerning Judah took place within 20 years of the prophecy. Judah became formless and void. Now, what Tim is asking is this. Did Judah in 587 BC become formless and void in the same way that Moses declares that the heavens and the earth were formless and void in Genesis? Now, if Jeremiah, whenever he speaks about the sun and the moon and the stars, means the same things, because Jeremiah 31:35 does talk about the sun and the moon and the stars, 31, 35, and 36, and all scholars, all preterists agree, he's using Moses' language, he means the same thing that Moses means, but he isn't talking about the physical sun or the physical moon or the physical stars. When he's talking about eschatology, he's speaking about covenant order. Then why is it that the formlessness and void of Jeremiah, which is covenantal without question, why when we go back to Genesis do we then say it's material atoms? Inconsistency much? Because Moses and the prophets are speaking the same language. The prophets do not change what Moses is speaking about in eschatology. They don't speak what he's speaking about in protology either. This is covenant language. This is covenant language. This is the main point that Martin presents here. Now I have about 10 minutes. Do you guys have any questions? I can show another 5 minutes of Martin, because I want to keep these watch parties, these discussions of what the speakers at the conference were speaking about, to less than an hour. I'm at 49 minutes. I can give the next 10 minutes for you either to express your agreement, your disagreement, or to ask questions which I may not answer, because I'm not the one who presented this presentation, but I think I understood it pretty well. I think I can answer it because I do teach this here on this channel quite regularly. So, do Moses and the prophets speak the same language? Are they referring to the same thing? Tim asks, if Moses is speaking about physical things in Genesis, why are all the prophets using the language of Genesis only for covenantal purposes? Where did it change? Where did the change take place? And how come nobody announced the change? And then he asks a more important question. If the prophets can change the meaning of Moses' words, then why cannot the apostles change the meaning of the prophets' word? Why can Jesus not change them? Yet when the prophets, when Jesus and the apostles come, Jesus says, I'm here only to fulfill that which the prophets and Moses said, the law and the prophets, period. I'm not here to change anything. I'm here to fulfill what they said. And they are speaking in one voice. Number two. Can the apostles change what the prophets mean? No, in fact, they don't. That's why we full preterists say that the decreation language of Isaiah 65 and other places was about the decreation of all covenant Israel, which took place in 70 AD, which was the end, which was also the time that the new heavens and the new earth, which had already been established and was already but not yet, this is when it was consummated. 70 AD. We are not waiting for a new planet. We are not waiting for a new universe. So that's done. Now, Robert Knoll says this, and your whole comment is not going to show up, but I'm going to read the part of it that does show up. The heaven represented the covenantal, governmental, and priestly order, the authority structure through which God related to Israel. Now, let me pause there right there, Robert. Is it only to Israel? So, heaven and earth, Robert, in Genesis 1, is that to Israel? Is the heaven and earth in Genesis 1 the covenantal order of how God governed Israel? Israel did not exist at Genesis 1. So how is it that in Genesis 2 it says, verse number 4, this is the account of how God created the generations of heaven and earth? Who are those heavens and earth in Genesis? So we must be careful. You say the intended audience was Israel. Are you saying that the Israelites in Moses' time are the first people to hear about these heavens and earth? Are you saying that the story of Genesis is first only heard by the Israelites? Are you saying Joseph did not know this story? Are you saying Abraham did not know this story? What about Noah? Did he know this story? What about Adam and his sons? Did they know this story? I would like to disagree with you and say no. Moses is editing and presenting this to Israel at the time of the Exodus and afterwards, but he is not the first person to write it. He's not the first. There is humongous evidence that the story of Genesis already existed. There are other cultures within the ancient Near East which have Noah's story written down. Adam's story, Apu, written down. So to claim that the Bible story appears in 1350 BC, I think is going to be contradicted by history. Going to be contradicted by evidence on the ground. I do not believe that Moses is the author of Genesis. I believe that Moses is the editor of Genesis. And therefore the language of heaven and earth exists at Genesis. It does not begin existing 3,000 years later. When the Bible says that he opened the heavens and the the ground so that water will come up. That language is in Noah's time. That language is not in Moses' time. So you say, I don't understand what that matters. Is this no? Listen, brother, let's be honest. Israel begins to exist in Jacob. So if the account of Noah, the Toledot of Noah, if the account of Adam in Genesis 5 was written at the time of Adam, the audience is not the same. The audience is not the same. The audience is not the same, brother. In the same way that you cannot say, because the apostles received the writings of the Old Testament, are they the audience of Moses? The apostles in the first century? Absolutely not. The audience of Moses in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy is Israel at the time of the Exodus. But the accounts of Noah, the accounts of Adam, the accounts of the sons of Noah were written long before Israel existed. There is evidence, and if you want that evidence, you can always come back and I'll give it to you, brother. There is evidence that Genesis was written long before the time of Moses. Much evidence. I've already given some. The story of Ziusudra, Noah, exists within other cultures within that. So unless you're saying that Moses copied the story of the Sumerians, which we don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't believe Moses copied anybody's story. I believe that Moses received writings. In the time of Adam and Noah, writing was already existing. Anyway, here is a point. Let me go back to your comment here because I want to finish here before the hour is out. You say the heavens were the covenantal priestly order. Adam. Now let me ask you this, Robert. Is Adam a priest? Does the Bible present Adam as a priest? And is Adam someone who precedes Jacob in history? Did Adam exist as a person, Robert? Did Abraham exist as a person? Did Melchizedek exist as a person? Did Abel exist historically? Did Cain exist historically? How do you read your Bible? Because the way I read my Bible, I believe they existed. I believe Adam was a real person. I believe Eve was a real person. By the way, let me put that out there because people say covenant creationists don't believe that Genesis 1 to 11 is real history. We believe it's real history. Well, how do you say you don't know? Then do you know if Jesus existed in history? Because then you have to admit you don't know anything about the Bible, because the Bible presents Adam as having existed in history, and the Bible presents Adam as being an ascendant, a biological ascendant of Jesus Christ. So if you don't believe that Adam existed, then you cannot believe that Jesus existed either. Even if they are archetypes, archetypes do exist. Something that is an archetype doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Okay? Saying something is an archetype does not in any way discount its actual historical existence. Saying it's an archetype is saying this is the purpose it served in its existence. The fact that it's an archetype by default means it existed. Well, if you believe that Jesus existed, do you believe Abraham existed? Anyway, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of arguments that I don't think will get us anywhere, because I'm the one that is on the mic here. I believe that Adam existed about 7,000 years ago. You say you don't think that it matters that those people existed? Well, that's up to you. As a teacher, within the covenant eschatology and within full preterism, I think it absolutely essentially matters. I think that what you're suggesting, Robert, is totally divorced from what we believe as Christians, what we believe as full preterists, what we believe as covenant creationists. And of course, I'm not condemning you, but I'm just saying that view is not a view I can hold. And that view is not a view that I know anyone who is in a position of influence. I don't think Don Preston holds that. I don't think Ed Stevens or any of these guys, I don't think, and I've sat with any of them. It matters. It may not matter to you, and I know it doesn't matter to many people who claim to be Israel only, and I know you have a bent towards Israel only in some fashion. I know it doesn't matter to you guys, but you need to know it matters to us. So if it doesn't matter to you, I give that to you. But obviously, I'm not going to get into a back and forth about it because it doesn't matter to you. That means that we cannot really go the same direction because things that we believe are essential and foundational, you say they don't matter. So I got to leave it there with all due respect. Okay. So anyway, let's get back to we are examining what Tim Martin is saying. And what Tim Martin is saying is that what Moses says about the beginning matches what the prophets say about the beginning, and what Moses says about the end matches what the prophets say about the end. And so with Jesus and the apostles. And that was the main point of this part of the presentation. So since we are at an hour mark, I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to leave it here. When we come back, we will start off where we stopped off at let me just make sure, at the 16-minute mark. 16:51 is where we left off, and we will continue from there the next time. It's probably not going to be today, so I am going to do this for a while so that people who have questions about the presentations by Tim Martin will be able to answer them. I will do this for every one of the presentations that were presented. So the next couple months, I am going to be rehashing what was presented at the Eschatology of the Prophets conference. I think it was an excellent conference. The quality of the presenters was extraordinary. The quality of the participants was amazing. And most importantly, God was exalted and glorified. The saints were edified. We had an amazing time, and many people testified that they were able to live out of that place different, transformed from the way they came in. Even those who are watching online can testify to that. In fact, why don't we take, for those of you who either watched online or were there in person, can you give just a one-line summary? What did you experience? What was your observation? I can see my friend Ben, and he actually says, even before I ask, thank you for teaching. I enjoyed watching your conference online. Thank you so much, Ben. It was great to have you. I see my friend Helen, whom I was able to meet for the very first time. The sweetest, most beautiful soul you'll ever meet. Helen, I was just so blessed by you. Brother John was there also, and he brought his little baby and his wife. He says, awesome, I can't wait until next year to come back, where you can start putting it on your calendar. I believe it will be sometime next week, maybe a little bit later, but we'll be announcing the next date. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that we are going to be in the same place, because we felt that it was just an excellent venue. And even though we know we are not going to be able to hold it there too long if we are going to want a bigger and bigger growth of people coming in, but we are going to hold it the same place next year. We're just going to kind of cap it off where we capped it off this year. 100 participants, and that will be it. Helen says, the fellowship was my greatest takeaway. The teachings have always been superb. Wow, that is such a wonderful commendation. Thank you, Helen. Indeed, the fellowship was extraordinary. The fellowship was just amazing. Meeting so many people, getting time to spend time with them, taking pictures, eating together, gaining 10 pounds together. That was something else. 4 days just flew by. And many times when people go to, this type of retreats, you are looking to go and visit the places. We didn't even get to leave the place, and I don't think anybody missed leaving the place because everything was just so great. Just so great. John says, that was awesome. Next time, my daughter will be bigger so we can stay on site. Praise God for that. Shizna says, the warmth of the people. Heaven is real. John says, I literally gained 10. I've not even gone to weigh myself because I know it's not going to go well with me. My glucose meter has been telling me, bro, you need to do something because you are eating too well. Because I ignored everything the doctor said. Because I was like, I'm just gonna enjoy myself for 4 days, and I'm paying the price now. I can feel it in my toes. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. This has been part 1 of the post-conference watch party. We were examining the faith at the field of Anathoth by Tim Martin, and so far we have not gone too far. He has already established as a summary that Mike Sullivan does an excellent job of showing us that Moses is a prophet. Moses is a prophet going forward. He prophesies about things that will happen, but Moses is a prophet even going backward. When I was a full-blown Pentecostal, like all the way, one of the things that I learned, because I learned many things that I will never give up, is that prophecy has 3 dimensions. Prophecy, we always thought about prophecy as being forward-looking. No, prophecy has 3 dimensions. Prophecy has foresight, which is forward-looking. Prophecy has insight, which is God speaking prophetically about what is happening now, insight. And prophecy also has hindsight, where God shows the prophet what happened in the past. And I believe that God was showing Moses what happened in Genesis, not to tell him, hey, look at how I created atoms and chemicals and biology. Rather, look at how I began the covenant with my people, the covenant creation. Well, doesn't the Bible speak about the material things? No, it does not. Because that is not the focus of the Bible. The focus of the Bible is 2 covenants, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. The material beginnings of the universe are another story altogether. Let me say this. There is ample evidence that this universe and this earth has been existing much longer than 6,000 years. The chronology of the Bible does not allow anything to Genesis 1 to go any much further back than 10,000 years. Yet, the evidence on the ground, which we cannot ignore, goes back millions, even billions of years. So that's why I don't even struggle with covenant creation. Because I know young earth creationism is not the position of the Bible. So therefore I have to ask myself then, what is happening in Genesis? And that is what covenant creation answers. Anyway, guys, have a very good time. I will come back later on this evening for a general discussion, not on the conference issues. So just so we can talk about other issues so that people can ask general questions. And I hope that we will be able to fellowship at that point. So until the next time, thank you so much. This has been your brother in St. Louis. I look forward to more and more fellowship. God bless you. Oh, but before I go, I have to. Shizna says you guys were feasting on everything. Yes, the word and material things, the atoms. John Adams says, Shizna, he cooked so good for us on Sunday. I hope you're talking about Jesus. Well, I do enjoy having a good cookout, and I trust that you guys enjoyed it, and I look forward to more and more. Next time, John, next time, I will actually bring a whole goat or a whole lamb to the conference center. And one of the nights, because they actually, we didn't get to do this. They had this huge grill, and they even had put fire charcoal in it, and they told me use it. We were just too busy. I will try to organize it so that on one of the nights next year we can do a goat roast, and you guys can taste the African goat roast. This is from Ness. He says, as someone who is enjoying so much of the conference, one thing I'd love to see is you and Tim to dialogue with Mike and Preston in a live broadcast. As the Lord opens the door, we will do that, because we are pretty good friends with Don Preston. It is our hope that we'll continue to actually invite him to come and teach us, because he's such a power ball. I am pretty good friends with Mike Sullivan. Actually, him and I are going to share a platform in Arkansas. I met him last year in Virginia. So yeah, I'm open to it. If he's open to it, because I'm all for coming together and actually just having a good conversation. Not even necessary debate. Just a good conversation. Just a good back and forth. So I look forward to that. I really, really do want that. Jack Scott is here. Jack Scott says, you are wonderful hosts. And of course, you guys were just wonderful. I don't want to call you guests, because you are home. We are home in your presence forever. By the way, Jack, did you receive the songs that I sent you on email? I hope you did. So we always enjoy hosting. Our culture, where we come from in Kenya, is very, very Abrahamic, if I may say that. We believe in, overwhelming our guests with food and good company and good stories. And so even in the past, we have been able to host. It's been wonderful. This time was very special because we did not have to do as much work as we usually do when we do these conferences. Because in the past, my wife had to cook for however many people showed up. So that has been a challenge. So we found a solution for that. Now we'll be having these people or similar people do all the work of the cooking, and their cooking was praise God. So anyway, Jack, I'm glad that you were able to receive those songs. If anybody wants to receive some of the songs that we played at the conference, let me see. We are talking about the field of Anathoth. And since we are talking about Moses, how about I do this? I'm going to close by playing you guys my song that I did not play at the conference. Is called From Moses to Messiah. How about that? Let me finish by playing you my song From Moses to Messiah, because here in this section, which we have just reviewed, Tim Martin actually quotes Mike Sullivan's book, which is called Moses to Messiah. So I think this is the most appropriate way for me to end this broadcast. Let me find it. And when I play this song after this, that it will be over. It will be done. It will be cooked. So Moses to Messiah. It's very, very powerful and beautiful song made with AI. From Moses to Messiah. There you go. Let me just test it out. Make sure that it's going to play right. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. All right, here we go, guys. This will be it for now. I just never close a thing. I intended for this to be less than an hour, Jack. I'm just long-winded. I can't help it. It's not my fault. It's the fault of these people asking me questions. I'm not going to take responsibility for this one. So here we go. Moses to Messiah. Be blessed. Enjoy until the next time.
Blood on the doorpost, the night of release. sea of peace, but shadows and symbols were only the start, till the Lamb of God wrote freedom on our hearts. What the law could only show, grace and truth made overflow. From Moses to Messiah, from Sinai to the cross, every feast was a promise, every lamb lost. Now the veil is broken, heaven's glories come. Christ our Passover, the risen one. We live in the temple not made by hands, the bride and the lamb in the promised land. Oh, unleavened bread, his sinless life, first fruits arisen, death denied, Pentecost fire, the Spirit poured, trumpet sounded, he came in the Lord. Day of atonement, the price was paid, tabernacles found, his home remained. He fulfilled them all, one by one, from the cross to the kingdom come. 70 strong, the old was gone, new creation forever born. From Moses to Messiah, the story complete. Oh, grace on the throne where mercy meets. God with his people, no night, no pain. The Lamb and the bride forever reign. Oh, we are his dwelling, well and known. Heaven the bride forever reign. From Moses to Messiah, glory complete. Grace on the throne where mercy meets. From Moses to Messiah, forever we dwell with you.
We invite you to the Eschatology of the Prophets 2026 Gateway to Fulfillment Conference, featuring Don K. Preston, William Bell Jr., Jack Scott, Tim Martin, Michael Miano, Zach Davis, and Steve Magua. Join us July 8th through 11th, 2026 at the beautiful Todd Hall Retreat Center near St. Louis, Missouri, for 4 days of powerful biblical teaching, fellowship, worship, and prophetic insight. Seats are limited. Register today at www.thewellchurchstl.com/events.